Congressional Republicans moved to reverse an executive action deferring deportation for more than 4 million undocumented immigrants. Meanwhile, speculation continues over whether Congress will take on the long-debated Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill. In October 2012, congressional arguments over the federal budget forced a government shutdown. Now, these headlines focus on the people who regularly get heard. The president, Congress, they always have a microphone or a camera in front of them. We listen to these newsmakers because they have the platform. But we often miss the voices of the people affected by their actions. Now, I'm a news reporter, so I talk to people all day long. I talk to people from all walks of life. But too often, when we hear the news, what we hear is the official story, the one that comes from a spokesperson. Now, sometimes we hear the story from behind the scenes, but usually it comes from a place that we know well, one that we're comfortable with. Now, one day, it wasn't very long ago, I needed one more thing to make dinner. So what did I do? I went to the store, I grabbed a bag of kale, paid, jumped back in the car. Now, when I got home, I looked at that bag of kale as I'm preparing my meal, and I go, I know that label. It was like a snapshot from an old friend that I hadn't thought of in a long while. It said, I know these people. The family that owns the farm that cultivated, sprouted, and grew that kale, they have a huge operation in a place that I called home for 7 years. That's Yuma County, Arizona. Now, most of us, hopefully, are eating leafy greens. Now, this winter, if you eat leafy greens, chances are they were grown in Yuma. That sunny corner of southwest Arizona grows 90% of the nation's winter greens. And although it takes 45,000 workers to harvest those greens, rarely do they enter our discussions as we raise our forks to our mouths. For the most part, these people are invisible. Every year, hundreds of farm workers descend on a park the size of 2 city blocks in the southwest corner of Arizona, just south of Yuma. Most of us are still in bed, but they come to an annual event for farm workers called El Día del Campesino. They come for health checks, for flu shots, donated clothing, and a hot meal on their way to work. On the east edge of Friendship Park, there's a chain link fence. That chain link fence separates the park from a U.S. port of entry. That U.S. port of entry is where these people line up at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 and 6 days a week, on their way to work. To the south, there's a large 18-foot steel barrier wall that overlooks a 100-foot sandy no man's land. That's restricted only to Border Patrol agents. Just past that area is a small Mexican town where most of these people call home. On this particular morning, the men and women at the Día del Campesino, they're too time crunched. They don't have time to spend with me. They've got to go get their flu shot, they've got to go get a hot meal, and they've got to run to catch a bus, an old converted school bus, on their way to pick broccoli, cauliflower, collard greens, and on their way to pick iceberg lettuce. For those that do take the time and aren't afraid of my microphone, which I assure you many of them are, they tell the stories that we all tell. The one that you probably told your friend earlier this morning. They tell us about how they wish they made a little bit more money, how they wish they had more time to spend with their children, and, ironically, how they wish they ate a little bit better. But many of their stories are unique. They're frustrated about the work visa that only allows them in the country 4 months out of the year. They'd prefer to stay and work in Mexico, but the money that they make in a U.S. farm is much better than anything that they would make back home. Some of them are U.S. citizens, but they're staying in Mexico and migrating every day for work because that person that they will not live without, their immigration process has dragged on for many years. At one point or another, we've all had a situation like they do. We've had to make a tough choice between work and family. We've had to make a tough choice between the people and the places that we love and the income that we need to support them. None of these people is feeling sorry for themselves. They're living and trying to make their lives better. Now, to the west, about a mile of this park where everyone met, there's a man sitting alone in a white truck with the green markings of the U.S. Border Patrol. He's sitting there watching the dry Colorado River basin, looking for evidence of people crossing the border illegally. For the people back in Friendship Park, my microphone is an inconvenience, maybe taking a couple minutes of their time. But for the men and women of Border Patrol who don't have clearance to speak with me, yikes, I'm a pariah. Now, the reason for that is if they speak to me, they have a story to tell. But if they speak to me without clearance from their supervisors, they could be jeopardizing their livelihoods. Saying the wrong thing in public could lead to a disciplinary action. Now, I do talk to agents. Off mic, they'll tell me all the things that concern them. They'll tell me the stories about how emotional it is to find a dead body in the desert or someone who's out there dying of thirst. I remember one supervisor who hollered very angrily talking about how human smugglers treat the children in their care, who told me about how they give them medication that makes them sleepy and docile so that they won't cry and get attention of agents. One Border Patrol canine handler had a tender moment that I was able to observe where he pet his dog as he was resting and panting. He fed him water, very concerned about how he's going to hold up on a hot summer day in the Southwest desert. I've seen these tough men tense up, talking about that isolation of spending a long shift at night alone in the desert, telling me about their fear for their families. What will become of them if the unthinkable were to happen? And on more than one occasion, I've seen them cry at the loss of a brother in law enforcement. Now, immigration reform could increase the number of migrant workers who come across the border and harvest our food. More immediately, it would change the budget and the staffing of U.S. Border Patrol. In a real and immediate way, that 2012 government shutdown, it put the incomes of those agents at risk. They talked to me about how they were agonizing about what they were going to do with their budget while they waited for a paycheck that they didn't know was going to come. They also told me how their private consternation worked over whether or not they were going to be able to pay their mortgages. And because of the job that I have the opportunity to tell the stories that you wouldn't see in headlines elsewhere. When you consume media, it's so easy to take that official narrative that comes from a spokesperson. How much more important is it to think of the people who are affected by a legislative action, an executive order, or a company merger? Seek out the stories that highlight the people affected, rather than just the mouthpieces. You know what? You can go beyond that. There's someone in your life right now whose voice is not being heard. Maybe it's somebody at work who has an idea to make that workplace more efficient. Maybe it's someone who just has to have their voice heard. They just want to be validated, to hear their point of view. Are we giving an ear to these people? Or are we just focused on our own lives and the people who already have the platform to tell their own stories? Now, I urge you to seek out the unheard stories that so many of us are never given the opportunity to tell. Thank you.